This program is made possible by the support of Delta Dental, Quick Trip, Marshfield Clinic Health System, Wisconsin Counties Association, Wisconsin Hospital Association. Watch WisconsinEye on Spectrum Channels 995 and 363 and at wiseye.org.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I hope everyone is staying safe and well during these crazy times. I have with me today Gretchen Benjamin, who is the Associate Director at the Nature Conservancy. She too is going to be talking about today's event. But first of all, let me thank you all for joining. Today, President Trump is signing into law the Great American Outdoors Act. We talked about this legislation last week, being one of the largest public investments in our public land ownership in the history of our country. Think our national parks and our wildlife refuges, all the public parks around here in Wisconsin. So I'm glad the president is signing it and making it official today, and we hope to use it and do great things with it. But today I'm also announcing passage of another important piece of legislation that I've been working hard to get across the finish line. The Water Resources Development Act. This has been one of my priorities as one of the founders and co-chairs of the bipartisan Mississippi River Caucus, because there's perhaps the greatest investment that our government is making in the preservation and the conservation of the Mississippi River of all time. There are important programs in it that will help us manage the river system, to monitor it, to find out what danger spots are arising, and how we can continue to use it for our enjoyment, given the multiple purposes that the river brings, from commercial navigation, tourism, to outdoor recreation. This Water Resources Development Act recognizes that multiple use and also strikes the right balance in maintaining those uses. A couple of the important programs that are authorized and funded under this legislation is the Navigation and Ecosystem Sustainability Program. This was one of our priorities in the Mississippi River Caucus, to have an authorized program for the infrastructure needs of the river, the lock and dam system, but also for crucial investments in the ecosystem management and the natural management of the river. Not only is the NEST program fully authorized, but it calls for the first time significant funding under this WRDA bill. That was a major accomplishment. Also, in light of the fact that the driftless area alone in our region has roughly a $1.1 billion annual economic impact and affects directly or indirectly 45 to 50,000 jobs up and down this river system. So it's a huge economic impact. Also under this legislation, it fully funds the Upper Mississippi Restoration Program, the Environmental Management Program, which is a lot of the habitat restoration projects that we see here. It has a significant increase in funding. So the island restoration that many of you have seen is an example of that along the Mississippi. But it also significantly funds the long-term resource monitoring program. That's the incredible science that the USGS Science Lab on French Island is doing. the environmental science lab. I happen to be biased, but I believe they're doing some of the best science in our federal government right here on French Island when it comes to resource monitoring, tracking sediment and nutrient flows, but also dealing with invasive species along the river and throughout the river basin. This legislation also requires a long-term water resource plan for the maintenance of the Mississippi River, a much broader coordination as far as river basin management for the first time too. That will be significant as far as our longer-term planning, including flood mitigation planning, and how we use the natural system within the river basin to control and contain floods and minimize the damage that occurs from time to time right around this area. And then finally, it establishes a national policy for reusing clean dredge material. As many of you know, we have a requirement to maintain a 12-foot navigation channel for the commercial barges that go up and down the river. A lot of times that requires dredging that channel so that the barges don't get stuck. Problem is you have to put that dredge material somewhere. Recently, Buffalo County was having problems as far as eminent domain being used to place dredge material on farms up there. Also, the potential of multiple trucks traveling through Alma on a daily basis. This now requires the Corps to study the clean, reusable use of the dredge material, get us out of that box. And it could be used for construction, road construction, even for frac sand mining is a great potential. But that plan too, I think, will be helpful in dealing with the dredging requirements that we have in the river and how best to dispose it without creating too much community hardship at the same time. So overall, I think it's a significant piece of legislation. The Water Resources Development Act was one of our top priorities in the bipartisan Mississippi River Caucus. It will have a tremendous impact up and down the river, but also throughout the entire river basin watershed area, which is basically everything east of the Rocky Mountains and west of the Appalachian Mountains is the Mississippi watershed basin. And this now will give us the tools to do long-term planning so we can better preserve and protect it for our use, but also for future generations' use. Now, let me bring in one of the foremost experts we have on large river systems, and especially the Mississippi River, Gretchen Benjamin. As I mentioned, Gretchen is the Associate Director of the Nature Conservancy. She's a large river specialist, especially for the Mississippi River. She was formerly of the Wisconsin DNR, we're certainly glad to have her today to offer some perspective about what the Water Resources Development Act is all about. So Gretchen, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for inviting me, Ron. It's a real pleasure to be here today. When it comes to the Water Resources Development Act, the Nature Conservancy follows it pretty carefully because there is a lot of work associated with how we work with the Corps of Engineers on ecosystem projects really across the country, but many of them are here in the La Crosse area and on the Mississippi River. So we follow it quite closely, and we're seeing a lot of really good things in the House Word Bill, as we call it, right now. And certainly with these elements that Ron has worked hard on, it helps to protect and increase the habitat restoration legacy we have throughout the upper Mississippi, continues to build on our knowledge of the river so we can manage that river better. It's gonna help us with finding solutions that are both natural and human-built solutions to some of our flooding issues along the river, and help us with some of the issues that are associated with invasive species that can really destroy a lot of the things that we've done to improve the river. Those invasive species can be very harmful. So certainly in particular, the Upper Mississippi River Restoration Program has to date restored over 100,000 acres of river floodplain on, really about 1,200 miles of river. And that in itself is quite an amazing feat. But what we're really seeing in areas where we have multiple projects coming together, it resets the river dynamics and really puts in place the ability for the river to start healing itself and actually recreating habitat between existing habitat and this built habitat we've created on the river. So it has this exponential way of really doing restoration on the river. And some of the examples of that are right here in the La Crosse area. If you go down by Stoddard and Brownsville, you'll see this for yourself, and it's an amazing thing. But in addition to all the work that the restoration part of the Upper Mississippi River program has done, we're also seeing amazing work coming out of the monitoring. And really what this helps us do is understand what the restoration is doing. Is it going to the targeted areas? And is it providing the outcomes we want to see from that work? And it helps us set the course for the next generation of restoration work. So those two components together are really what's helping us improve the river and the system. And by increasing the funding, the funding will potentially increase with the language in this WRDA bill by, it's something like $25 million. It's really an incredible increase. And I see Olivia Dorothy's also on the call here today with American Rivers, and she's quite instrumental in having this happen as well. So that particular piece is really exciting to the Nature Conservancy. I know it's exciting to American Rivers as well, to see that it's about time. It's been at that level for about, since 2000. So about 20 years now. So we're finally increasing the authorized expenditures associated with that program. So that's a pretty huge piece. The comprehensive study that's also going to be done on the Upper Mississippi River has many aspects to it, but one of the areas that really interests the Nature Conservancy is the fact that we're going to be looking at both nature-based solutions to flooding and also the traditional levee system updates and improvements that may happen. But we're really understand more about the river. We have changed the dynamics of that river over time. We've constricted the river to about 10 to 20% of what its original floodplain is. And now when we have flooding, there's no place for that river to go. If we can create some room for the river by reconnecting floodplains, restoring some floodplains, we will have areas for that water to reside during the flood and slowly release, and that helps to manage floods all the way down the system. And so it'll probably be a new look at the way that we deal with flooding on the river, using some of the more traditional methods, but also adding to that. So I think, really combining these strategies will help us to build a better flood resilient system up and down the Mississippi River. And I just, like to comment a little bit about, Ron mentioned that the Navigation Ecosystem Sustainability Program may start to have construction funding associated with it. That is an integrated program that looks at the needs of commercial navigation as well as the needs of the ecosystem. And we're really excited about potentially that program moving forward, because it takes the tools that we have in our current restoration program, but builds on them in terms of providing more opportunities for managing the locks and dams better, for reconnecting floodplain and restoring that floodplain, potentially looking at fish passage where it makes sense to be doing that sort of thing. So it gives us a lot of additional opportunities when it comes to the river and how we restore that river. So I just want to say that we're just really happy with what is in the bill. There's certainly things we'd like to see in addition, but there's a huge, good base of work that we can move from and come to some sort of consensus between the House and the Senate moving forward.
Great. Well, thank you, Gretchen. And I should have also mentioned that Gretchen has been serving on my Mississippi River Advisory Committee back home too, and done incredible work with help and advice on where we need to steer policy to be good stewards of the river. And that's ultimately what this is about. We have a responsibility to be good stewards of one of the most beautiful and impactful river systems in the entire world, the Mississippi River and the entire watershed area. And I too want to thank Olivia Dorothy at American Rivers for the work that they did in putting the Water Resources Development Act together. It was was a real team effort. But this is also part of our DNA here throughout Western Wisconsin. You know, as a kid growing up on the north side of La Crosse, it was a real Huck Finn existence for me. Every chance I had, I was on that river system somehow, boating or fishing or camping or skiing or swimming. And we realized the important value that it has in not only our quality of life, but the tourism, the outdoor recreation it brings, but the economic impact. And it's important for our generation to be good stewards of this resource so that our children and grandchildren have a wonderful legacy to inherit. And I think this Water Resources Development Act lives up to that responsibility. It heads us in that right direction with better comprehensive management throughout the watershed area, and also recognizing the multiple uses of the system and why we're funding these important programs in order to maintain that use and the enjoyment. Whether you like to boat or camp or fish or hunt, bird watch along the river, it's all out there. And it's important for each of us to do our part in order to protect it and to enhance it. So that's why we're announcing this important legislation today, and be happy to take any questions that anyone might have. Thanks again, Gretchen.
Thank you.
Representative Kind, WXW Roger Staffaroni, what's the number one priority that needs to be recognized, and how would you address that?
You know, the number one priority, and I think this bill reflects it, is maintaining the appropriate balance on the multiple uses of the river system. Yes, commercial navigation is an important part. It's an important river highway transporting goods up and down the river to various markets, including export markets, incredibly important to our family farmers up here, but also recognizing the important value that tourism and outdoor recreation brings. And therefore, the need for these comprehensive studies on resource management, making sure we're going forward with the good science that the USGS lab on French Island is doing with long-term resource monitoring, making sure we're doing the appropriate planning at the federal, state, and local level so it's a true partnership in the management of this river system. That's the way it's got to work, or it's not going to work very well.
Ron, this is Chuck Ozen from WKBT. So it's passed the House. Will it pass the Senate? Will the president sign it?
Yeah, Chuck, great question. We're in constant communication with our Senate colleagues right now. We had great cooperation with the Great American Outdoors Act, which was signed into law here today. And we need to move forward on this next WRDA bill too. So I know there's a lot of bipartisan interest in getting this done. It passed with a good bipartisan vote in the House. And we're having good, productive conversations with the administration. So we're hoping to have this completed yet this year and signed into law. Yeah, thanks, Chuck.
Roger, WXW again. Invasive species. We got those fish that jump out of the water and they keep heading north a little bit. How are things going with that battle on that front?
Yeah, I'll ask Gretchen to jump in on this too, because I know she's been focused on it. But the Asian carp has been a problem. And initially, USGS was doing the DNA testing so we can better identify where they are. And then perhaps through DNA sequencing, have a good tool in order to combat it and to prevent their spread throughout the system. I know they're on the cutting edge of a lot of interesting biological research that's being done with that, but also a variety of other invasive species that we have to keep an eye on throughout the river system. It's incredibly exciting to see, and that'd actually be a good storyline for you guys to go out to the USGS lab and see firsthand what exactly they're doing, because, man, this is mind-blowing, the type of research that's being done and the promise of getting it under control. Gretchen, you have anything to add?
I just say, that once invasive species are here, whether it's Asian carp or zebra mussels, or there's all kinds of different invasive species that have gotten here over the years. Our only hope is to try and manage them. And so the idea of trying to minimize any invasion is always the key to dealing with them. But within the Nature Conservancy, we are interested in seeing work move forward on a barrier between the Great Lakes and the Mississippi River, if at all possible, to minimize that exchange of the Asian carp in particular, getting up into the Great Lakes, and the Brandon Road Lock and Dam is kind of the focus for that particular piece. So we have an interest in that, but we're also, following some of the work that, like, by the Illinois DNR, where they're doing a lot of management of the fish through extensive capture and getting those fish out of the system. And they're doing a pretty good job keeping the numbers down. It's still just a huge, huge problem, but there are some management techniques out there that are being perfected to help deal with the issue as we have it today.
Great.
I have a question for both of you. This is Chuck Holton from WKBT again. Are you both satisfied with the balance that this will have as far as commerce and sportsmen and environment?
Yeah, Chuck, let me take first swing at that. I am pleased, and I think it does show the recognition that us members have in maintaining that important balance, but it's also based on direct feedback that we're getting from people back home here, Chuck. As I said, I set up this River Advisory Group many, many years ago to get direct feedback from those who are intimately involved in river management issues. Of course, I have a lot of contact with outdoor sports groups in the area, various tourist groups, and I think the sentiment on the street is we have to maintain that balance. Yes, commercial navigation is an important part of this, the lock and dam system that needs crucial upgrading, but also the ecosystem management of it as well. And this legislation certainly reflects that balance. Now we have to make sure that it's maintained, especially when it comes to the funding levels for all these programs. Gretchen?
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think as these programs get authorized and they're set up to be, considering all the different uses of the river and trying to manage and balance them, we just need to keep our due diligence out there so we make sure that that balance is continually maintained. And as I think about flood risk management, I want to think about, are we thinking about natural solutions to the flooding issue as well as those gray infrastructure solutions that we so often use with building levees higher and that sort of thing? Can we find other solutions that are probably in the long term going to be better for us as a country in terms of minimizing impact to the federal budget and really creating a better outcome for the river and the people that use the river?
Great. Thanks, Gretchen. That's it with the questions. Thank you all again for participating. Gretchen, thank you, for all the work you've done throughout the years. Olivia, thank you, and American Rivers too. We still have a little bit more work to go here, but certainly heading in the right direction with this legislation. Thanks, everyone. Stay safe out there.
Congressman Kind.
Bye. Yeah. Hi, Hope.
Oh, hi. I'm sorry. Can I just ask one quick question?
Sure. Yeah. Go ahead.
You mentioned that you're hoping to make progress on this this year, but I wanted to ask you, are you worried that just the ongoing pandemic could impact that progress?
Yeah, I hope we're still in session and are remaining in session as we negotiate the next COVID package. And hopefully that will come sooner rather than later, because a lot of these programs are expiring. It's going to create an incredible amount of hardship on many families throughout Wisconsin and America, not to mention the economic damage that will come unless Congress is there helping maintain a lot of these programs right now. But we're scheduled to be in September and even after the elections too. So there's still some time in order to get this and other pieces of legislation done, even outside of the coronavirus response.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Great. Thanks again, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Take care.
This program is a production of WisconsinEye, an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit media network with a mission to inform, educate, and engage the citizens of Wisconsin. WisconsinEye is the nation's first and only independently funded state civics broadcast network, providing gavel-to-gavel access to government proceedings and events at the state capitol.